She had always been drawn to the piano, the way its keys seemed to breathe under her touch, the way a single note could feel like a heartbeat. Music was more than just sound to her. It was a language that could express what words never could. But today, walking into the grand hall of the competition, she felt a tangle of nerves and excitement twisting in her stomach. She had dreamed of this moment for years, yet now that it had arrived, the reality was almost overwhelming. The hall was massive, larger than anything she had ever performed in. The ceiling stretched high, decorated with intricate patterns that glinted under the soft lighting. Rows of seats lined the room, and people were beginning to take their places. Some of the audience members were dressed elegantly, their eyes scanning the room with curiosity and quiet judgment. She caught glimpses of other participants, some pacing nervously, others seated quietly, their fingers drumming lightly on the tops of their cases. Everyone had a story, a reason they were here, and the unspoken competition hummed in the air, thick and palpable. As she made her way to the piano, her steps felt lighter than they should have. Her hands were clammy, despite the hours of practice she had put in. She had prepared for this meticulously. Every note, every pause, every rise and fall of the melody had been practiced again and again in her small, sunlit room back home. She had imagined this moment countless times, yet the reality was different. The grand piano in front of her seemed enormous, almost daunting, the polished black surface reflecting the rows of empty chairs waiting to be filled. The competition was known for its formality and precision. Judges sat at a long table, papers and pens in front of them, their expressions serious and unreadable. She could sense their eyes on her, studying, calculating. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that they were not there to intimidate her, that they were there to listen, to hear the music. She reminded herself of why she played, of the countless hours spent with her fingers dancing over the keys, of the comfort music had always given her. This was her moment, and she intended to honor it. When the assistant asked her to play the opening melody, it was described as the easiest tune in the competition. It was simple, well-known, the kind of melody that almost anyone with basic training could play. Some of the competitors chuckled quietly as she sat down. She felt their eyes, the invisible weight of their doubt pressing on her shoulders. She had heard that kind of skepticism before. People often underestimated her, seeing her quiet demeanor and assuming she was inexperienced. But she had learned long ago that music did not depend on appearances. It depended on feeling, on emotion, on the ability to tell a story through sound. Her fingers hovered above the keys, poised and ready. She let the silence of the hall fill her senses, the quiet before the first note a gentle invitation to begin. As her hands moved to the keys, she thought of the many nights she had spent alone, practicing in her room until the stars outside her window were the only witnesses. Those nights had been her refuge, her sanctuary. The piano had been a friend, a confidant, a place where her emotions could find expression when the world seemed too heavy to bear. She pressed the first key, and the simple melody began. At first, it was exactly as expected, soft and modest, almost hesitant. A few members of the audience smiled politely, nodding to themselves, assuming this would be a routine performance. She could feel the tension in the room, the quiet expectation that this would be nothing extraordinary. That was when she allowed herself a small, secret smile. She knew what she would do next, how she would transform this melody into something far greater than anyone anticipated. As she continued, the notes began to shift subtly. The melody grew richer, more textured, each note carrying a weight of feeling that was almost tangible. Her hands moved with confidence now, flowing from one key to another with precision and grace. She thought about the stories she wanted to tell, the emotions she wanted to convey, and allowed them to guide her fingers. The audience, initially polite and distant, began to lean forward slightly, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Something unexpected was happening, and they could sense it. She lost herself in the music, the hall fading away until only the piano and the melody existed. Every pause, every gentle crescendo, was deliberate. Every note was a word in a story she was telling without speaking. She thought of her past, of the struggles and small triumphs that had led her here. She thought of the teachers who had encouraged her, the family who had supported her, the nights of doubt and persistence that had shaped her as a musician. All of it was in her hands, in the sound that filled the room. There was a moment when a single note lingered, suspended in the air, and she could hear the collective intake of breath from the audience. She had never felt such a direct connection with a room full of strangers. They were listening, truly listening, to the emotions she poured into each chord. She realized that this was more than a performance. It was an exchange of energy, a conversation without words, and she loved it. Even as she played, she could sense the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. The judges, who had been writing notes mechanically, now had their heads slightly tilted, eyes focused intently on her hands and the piano. The other competitors, who had initially glanced at her dismissively, now watched in silent awe. She felt a quiet satisfaction, but no arrogance. She was not trying to impress. She was simply being herself, letting the music flow as it had always done. When the final note echoed and faded into silence, the hall remained quiet for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then, slowly, a ripple of applause began, hesitant at first, then growing stronger as people recognized the beauty and skill of what they had just witnessed. She allowed herself a small bow, her heart still racing, a mixture of relief and exhilaration washing over her. She had taken something simple and made it extraordinary, and in doing so, had told a story that resonated far beyond the notes on the page. As she stood, she noticed a few competitors approaching, offering quiet words of admiration. The judges exchanged brief glances, nodding to themselves, making notes that were far more animated than before. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a sense of connection that went beyond the competition itself. This was why she played, why she had dedicated so many years to the piano. It was not about winning or losing, but about touching others, about communicating something universal through the language of music. Walking away from the piano, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The nerves that had clutched at her earlier had loosened, replaced by a quiet confidence. She knew there were more performances to come, more challenges ahead, but for this moment, she had succeeded in being true to herself and to the music. The simplest melody had become a vessel for her story, a story that was just beginning to unfold. After her initial performance, she felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. Relief because she had managed to transform the simple melody into something more, something that surprised everyone, even herself. Anticipation because she knew the next round would be harder, and she would have to prove herself again, this time under even more scrutiny. She walked slowly away from the piano, her fingers still tingling from the energy of the notes she had played, and glanced at the audience. Some were leaning forward, their eyes fixed on her, a spark of curiosity and admiration dancing in them. Others whispered to one another, trying to understand what had just happened. She felt a quiet smile forming on her lips. She knew that her music had spoken for her in a way that words could not. Backstage, the atmosphere was intense. Participants were moving quickly, their expressions a mixture of determination and anxiety. She could hear snippets of conversations, discussions about repertoire, technical challenges, and the judging process. Some competitors were practicing in corners, their fingers running over imaginary keys, their lips moving silently to the rhythms in their heads. Others sat quietly, eyes closed, trying to center themselves. She found a quiet spot near the wall and took a deep breath, letting the sounds of the bustling backstage fade into the background. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought about why she played. The music had always been her way of expressing what she could not say, and she knew that no matter what happened in this competition, that truth remained hers. She heard footsteps approaching and opened her eyes. One of the assistants came over with a clipboard, quietly checking names and performance orders. When it was her turn again, she would be asked to play a slightly more challenging piece. The melody would no longer be simple or predictable, and she felt a flicker of nerves. But beneath it, there was a steady confidence. She had faced challenges before, moments when the world seemed bigger than her abilities, and yet she had always found a way to rise. She reminded herself of those times, letting their memory strengthen her resolve. As she walked toward the piano for the next round, she could feel the tension in the hall intensifying. The audience had grown quieter, the sense of expectation heavier. She noticed a few familiar faces from the earlier performance, leaning slightly forward in their seats, eyes fixed on her. There were whispers among the other competitors, an undercurrent of speculation and curiosity. She was aware of it all, but she let it wash over her without disturbing her focus. Her mind was already on the next melody, thinking of how she could bring it to life, how she could make it speak in a way that would resonate with the listeners. The piano sat waiting, its polished black surface reflecting the soft lights from above. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands lightly on the keys. The next melody began with a few familiar chords, slightly more complex than the first. She played them carefully at first, listening to the sound, feeling the vibration through her fingertips. She let the rhythm guide her, letting each note find its place in the space around her. Gradually, she allowed her own interpretation to unfold, weaving in subtle variations, unexpected pauses, and gentle flourishes that made the piece her own. She felt the music growing around her, filling the hall, reaching into the hearts of the listeners in a way that was almost tangible. She noticed small changes in the audience as she played. Some leaned forward, eyes wide with surprise and admiration. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, taking them somewhere beyond the hall. A few competitors glanced at each other, their expressions shifting from skepticism to quiet respect. The judges, who had been observing quietly, now had their heads slightly tilted, pens momentarily still in their hands. She felt a quiet thrill at the connection she was forming, not just with the music, but with everyone in the room. Each note, each chord, was a bridge between her and the world, and she cherished that moment of shared experience. As she continued, the melody began to tell a story. It spoke of moments of doubt, of quiet triumphs, of the perseverance required to keep moving forward when the path seemed uncertain. Her fingers danced across the keys, translating emotions into sound, allowing the music to carry the weight of experiences that words could never fully capture. She thought of the people who had supported her, the teachers who had guided her, the friends and family who had cheered for her from the sidelines. Their belief in her had given her strength, and she let that gratitude flow through her performance. There was a moment when the music became almost delicate, fragile, each note hanging in the air as if waiting to be discovered. She could feel the audience holding their breath, sensing the shift, feeling the tension and release that she had crafted. She allowed herself to be fully present, not thinking about the next note or the next chord, but simply listening and responding. The piano and she were in harmony, a partnership that allowed the melody to evolve naturally, to grow into something more than the sum of its parts. The melody shifted again, becoming more dynamic, more expressive. She added subtle touches, variations that revealed her understanding of the music and her own emotional depth. The hall seemed to respond, the air itself vibrating with the energy of the performance. She could sense the audience leaning in, caught in the moment, moved by something that was larger than the technical skill alone. She had learned long ago that music was not just about notes and rhythms, but about the ability to touch hearts, to evoke emotions, to create a shared experience that lingered long after the last sound had faded. As the final notes of the piece resonated, the hall remained silent for a heartbeat, as if everyone were suspended in the moment. Then, gradually, a wave of applause began, soft at first, then growing louder, stronger, more insistent. She allowed herself a small, humble bow, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment and connection. The judges exchanged nods and murmured to each other, clearly impressed by her interpretation and emotional depth. Competitors who had watched from the sidelines now approached her quietly, offering words of admiration and encouragement. She felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of community and shared passion that transcended the competition itself. Walking away from the piano, she felt her heart racing, not from nerves, but from the exhilaration of having shared something meaningful. She knew that there were more challenges ahead, more pieces to play, and that each would demand her focus and creativity. But for this moment, she allowed herself to savor the experience, to feel the joy of having connected with others through her music. She had taken a melody and given it life, and in doing so, had reminded herself why she played, why she devoted so much of her time and energy to the piano. Backstage again, she reflected on the performance. She felt a sense of quiet confidence, a knowledge that she could rise to the occasion no matter the difficulty of the next piece. The competition was not just about skill, but about the ability to express, to communicate, to touch the hearts of others. She had done that, and that realization filled her with gratitude and determination. The journey was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that her music could speak louder than words, that it could inspire, move, and connect in ways that transcended the ordinary. She took a deep breath and prepared herself, ready for the next chapter of this unforgettable experience. The next round of the competition felt different from the others. The room, already familiar from her previous performances, now seemed charged with anticipation. There was a quiet tension in the air, a sense that something extraordinary might happen, though no one knew exactly what. As she waited backstage, she watched the other participants, their faces a mixture of determination and anxiety. Some were reviewing their notes, others silently rehearsing passages in their minds. She observed them without judgment, feeling a connection to the collective energy of musicians all striving to express themselves. She thought back to her earlier performances, how she had taken something simple and transformed it. The applause, the nods from the judges, the looks of surprise from other competitors, all of it lingered in her mind. But she knew that this round would be even more challenging. The piece she was about to play was more complex, with difficult passages and nuanced expressions that required not just technical skill, but emotional understanding. She felt her heart quicken, not from fear, but from the thrill of the opportunity to create something meaningful once again. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano with a quiet confidence. The polished keys glinted under the lights, inviting her to begin. She took her seat, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands gently on the keys. For a moment, she simply listened to the room, the subtle hum of the audience settling into their seats, the faint creak of chairs, the soft rustle of pages from the judges' notes. She allowed herself to feel grounded in the present, letting the environment become part of the performance rather than a distraction. As she began to play, the notes flowed from her fingertips like water, precise yet fluid. The melody demanded attention, not just for its complexity, but for the depth of emotion it carried. She felt herself becoming one with the music, each passage a conversation between her and the piano, each chord a reflection of her inner world. The audience, initially quiet, began to respond to the emotion and intensity of her playing. Eyes widened, heads tilted, and a few people even closed their eyes, allowing themselves to be carried by the sound. The piece required moments of restraint and moments of intensity, and she navigated them with care. She allowed herself to linger on softer passages, letting the audience feel the subtle shifts in tone and emotion. In louder sections, her fingers danced with precision, but never lost the connection to the feeling behind each note. She thought about the story she wanted to tell, the journey of emotions she wanted to take the listeners on, and she let that guide her hands. The piano became an extension of her, a voice that spoke what she could not put into words. Halfway through the performance, she felt a moment of pure clarity. The audience was no longer just watching, they were experiencing. She could sense the shift in the room, the way the energy had changed from curiosity to engagement. The judges were leaning slightly forward, pens paused above paper, eyes fixed on her hands. Competitors who had initially seemed indifferent now watched with awe, as if realizing for the first time the depth of expression she could achieve. It was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding that something remarkable was unfolding. Her mind was fully present, yet free. She allowed herself to respond instinctively to the music, adding small variations that brought the piece to life. There were moments when she almost held her breath, waiting for the next chord, the next transition, allowing the tension to build naturally. She knew that music was not just about hitting the right notes, but about creating an experience, a journey that could touch hearts and linger in memory. Every subtle shift in dynamics, every nuanced touch of a key was deliberate, guided by years of practice and an instinctive understanding of the piano. As the piece progressed, she could feel the emotions building, a crescendo that carried with it the story of perseverance, hope, and quiet triumph. She thought of her journey to this point, the early mornings and late nights, the moments of doubt, the small victories that had fueled her passion. She let these memories guide her interpretation, pouring them into every note. The audience responded, leaning in, their attention unwavering, as if the music had become a bridge connecting her heart to theirs. The complexity of the piece demanded full concentration, yet she felt a sense of flow, a seamless connection between thought and action. Her hands moved with both precision and freedom, navigating difficult passages with ease while maintaining the emotional depth required. The room seemed to resonate with the sound, each note echoing off the walls, creating an immersive experience that enveloped both performer and audience. She was aware of the energy in the room, yet she remained focused inward, fully present in the moment. There were moments when the melody softened, almost fragile, requiring delicate control and sensitivity. She allowed herself to breathe with the music, to let each pause and each subtle shift convey meaning. The audience seemed to hold their collective breath during these moments, fully attuned to the nuances of her performance. The judges scribbled notes furiously, their expressions a mix of concentration and admiration. Competitors whispered quietly among themselves, clearly impressed by the level of artistry and emotion she was bringing to the stage. As the performance neared its conclusion, she felt a sense of fulfillment. She had taken a challenging piece and made it her own, transforming technical demands into an expressive narrative that resonated with everyone in the room. The final chords rang out, sustained and rich, filling the hall with a sense of completion. She allowed herself a brief pause, letting the sound linger, then rose from the bench with a humble bow. The audience erupted into applause, some standing, others clapping vigorously, their expressions filled with admiration and appreciation. Backstage, she felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had given everything she had to that performance, and it had been received with genuine recognition. The judges discussed among themselves, their voices low but clearly impressed. Competitors approached her, offering words of praise, some shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. She accepted their compliments with quiet gratitude, feeling a deep sense of connection to this community of musicians who shared her passion and dedication. She reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, the hours of practice, the countless small victories, the perseverance through doubt and challenge. All of it had led to this expression of herself. Through music, she felt a quiet confidence growing within her, a sense that no matter what challenges lay ahead in the competition, she could rise to meet them. The music had become a part of her, and she knew that she had the ability to communicate, to move, and to inspire through her art. As she prepared for the next phase of the competition, she allowed herself a moment of calm reflection. She understood that each performance was not just a test of skill, but an opportunity to share a piece of herself, to connect with others in a profound and meaningful way. She carried this understanding with her, knowing that her journey was about more than winning. It was about expressing, sharing, and touching lives through the universal language of music. She took a deep breath, ready to face the next challenge, confident in the power of her own voice and the music that flowed through her. The hall felt heavier now, as if the air itself was charged with anticipation. She could sense it the moment she stepped in, the way the audience had shifted in their seats, leaning forward slightly, waiting for what was to come. This was the point in the competition where reputations were solidified, where the difference between good and extraordinary became clear. She could feel the weight of expectation, yet it did not overwhelm her. Instead, it sharpened her focus, reminding her why she loved the piano so deeply. Every challenge, every note, was an opportunity to communicate something that went beyond words. She walked toward the piano, her steps steady despite the quickening of her heartbeat. The polished surface reflected the lights above, casting a soft glow across the keys. She took a moment to adjust the bench, let her hands hover above the keys, and feel the energy of the room settling around her. This was more than a competition. It was a chance to connect, to tell a story through music, and to leave an impression that could not be measured in scores alone. She closed her eyes briefly, letting her breath slow, and reminded herself of the journey that had brought her here. When she began to play, the notes came with a quiet confidence, gentle at first, building gradually into something richer and more expressive. The piece she had chosen was intricate, requiring both technical skill and emotional depth, and she allowed herself to become completely absorbed. Her fingers moved with a fluid grace, each key struck with purpose, each pause deliberate. The melody flowed naturally, as if it were speaking directly from her heart to the hearts of those listening. She could feel the audience leaning in, their collective attention a living presence surrounding her. The judges watched with intensity, their pens moving across sheets as they recorded notes. But she sensed something deeper in their eyes. They were no longer simply evaluating, they were experiencing. The competitors, who had watched her with polite curiosity in earlier rounds, now seemed captivated, their expressions a mixture of admiration and disbelief. The music she played had a way of drawing attention without demanding it, of communicating profound emotion without a single word. She felt the hall becoming alive with the resonance of the sound, each note creating ripples that extended far beyond the piano. As the piece progressed, she began to explore the emotional nuances within it. The soft passages allowed her to convey vulnerability, moments of quiet reflection that drew the listeners in. The louder, more intense sections spoke of passion, determination, and triumph. She moved seamlessly between the contrasts, letting the music tell a story that was both personal and universal. Her hands seemed to have a life of their own, responding to subtle shifts in mood and tempo. Guided by instinct and years of practice, each chord she struck carried meaning. Each pause created space for the audience to absorb the emotion. She noticed subtle reactions in the audience that made her smile inwardly. A few people closed their eyes, as if transported by the music. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, clearly captivated. Some whispered quietly to the person next to them, sharing the wonder of what they were experiencing. The judges, who had been focused on the technical aspects, now showed signs of deep engagement, their eyes following the movement of her hands and the ebb and flow of the melody. She felt a quiet thrill, not from seeking approval, but from the connection she was forging with everyone in the room. There were moments when the piece demanded total control, passages that could easily become rushed or strained if not executed with care. She embraced these moments, letting the tension guide her fingers, and allowed herself to explore the emotional depth of the composition. She remembered the hours she had spent practicing, the countless times she had played, stopped, and played again, striving for perfection while never losing the soul of the music. Those memories gave her strength, reminding her that every challenge was an opportunity to grow, to express, and to connect. Halfway through, a particularly difficult sequence arrived, a series of fast, intricate notes that demanded both precision and expression. Her fingers moved effortlessly, yet every motion was intentional, every note carrying weight. She could feel the audience responding, leaning in, sensing the mastery and emotion combined. The judges scribbled furiously, clearly impressed by her skill and artistry. Competitors watched in awe, some whispering quietly, unable to hide their admiration. She felt no pride, only a quiet satisfaction in sharing something so deeply personal and yet universally understood. As the piece built toward its climax, she allowed the music to soar, expressing joy, triumph, and release. Her body moved with the rhythm, her breathing synchronized with the ebb and flow of the melody. The hall seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the performance, and she could feel the collective energy of the audience responding, a feedback loop of emotion that lifted her playing even higher. Every note, every chord, every subtle inflection became part of an invisible dialogue between her and the listeners. Finally, the piece softened, a gentle descent into resolution. She allowed herself to linger on the last notes, letting them resonate fully, giving the audience a moment to absorb the conclusion. When the final chord faded, there was a heartbeat of silence, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Then the applause erupted, strong and sustained, echoing through the hall. Some people rose to their feet, others clapped with fervor, all moved by the performance they had just witnessed. She rose from the bench and bowed, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment and connection. Backstage, she was met with quiet admiration from competitors and staff alike. The judges conferred briefly, exchanging words that she could not hear, their expressions a mix of respect and astonishment. A few competitors approached her, offering handshakes and compliments, their previous skepticism replaced with genuine acknowledgement of her talent. She accepted their words with humility, feeling grateful for the shared experience rather than seeking accolades. The energy of the room, the connection she had felt with the audience, lingered within her, a reminder of why she played. As she walked away from the stage, she reflected on the journey of this round. Each note, each passage, had been an opportunity to communicate her inner world, to share a story that was both uniquely hers and relatable to anyone who listened. The challenge had been immense, yet she had risen to it, transforming complexity into an expressive, heartfelt performance. She understood that music was a living thing, capable of bridging gaps, connecting hearts, and leaving lasting impressions. This realization filled her with a quiet confidence and a sense of purpose. She found a quiet corner backstage and let herself breathe deeply, feeling the tension of the performance release from her body. The applause still echoed faintly in her mind, a reminder of the connection she had forged. She knew there was still more to come, more performances to navigate, yet she felt prepared. Each round was a test, yes, but also an opportunity to grow, to share, and to touch others in ways that transcended simple skill. The music she played was not just a demonstration of technique, it was a reflection of her heart, a gift she could offer freely to anyone willing to listen. With the next challenge approaching, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She thought about how far she had come, the sacrifices, the perseverance, and the countless hours of dedication. Each experience had shaped her, teaching her not just about music, but about patience, resilience, and the importance of expressing oneself fully and honestly. She felt a deep gratitude for the journey, for the chance to perform, and for the audience that had welcomed her music so openly. She knew that no matter the outcome of the competition, she had already achieved something invaluable, a true connection through her art. As she prepared to leave the backstage area and face the next phase, she felt a quiet determination. The music would continue, and she would continue to give it her all. She understood that the most profound moments in life often came from sharing one's passion, from daring to be vulnerable, and from trusting in one's abilities. She stepped forward with steady confidence, ready to meet whatever awaited, knowing that the music she carried within her could reach far beyond the walls of any hall, touching hearts in ways words never could. The final stage of the competition had arrived, and the atmosphere in the hall was electric. Every corner seemed charged with expectation, every whisper and shuffle adding to the tension. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her, but instead of fear, there was an almost palpable excitement. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for, every hour of practice, every sacrifice, every quiet moment spent alone with the piano. She felt a deep connection to the music, a sense that this performance could express everything she had experienced along her journey. As she approached the piano, she noticed the audience leaning forward, eyes fixed on the stage. Some faces were familiar from previous rounds, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and awe. She took a moment to take in the scene, breathing deeply, letting the energy of the hall sink into her. Every performance before this had been a step, each note a building block, but this one felt different. It carried the weight of the journey, the culmination of her growth, and the chance to leave a lasting impression. She sat down at the piano, adjusting the bench and letting her hands hover above the keys. For a moment, she simply listened to the silence, the hushed whispers fading into the background. This silence was part of the music, part of the story she was about to tell. She reminded herself that the notes she was about to play were not just technical exercises. They were expressions of her heart, her experiences, and her passion. She could feel the presence of the audience, the quiet anticipation that filled the room, and it became a source of energy rather than distraction. The first notes rang out, soft and deliberate, carrying a quiet elegance that drew the listeners in. The piece she had chosen for the final round was demanding, with intricate passages, dynamic contrasts, and emotional depth. She allowed herself to become fully immersed, her fingers moving with fluid precision, guided by both practice and instinct. The music began to unfold, telling a story of struggle, resilience, hope, and triumph. Each chord resonated with the experiences she had lived, every pause a breath that allowed the audience to absorb the emotion. She noticed subtle reactions in the audience, tiny movements that told her they were engaged. Some leaned forward slightly, eyes wide and attentive. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, and a few whispered softly to one another, clearly moved by what they were hearing. The judges, who had been carefully observing, now had expressions of admiration and focus, clearly captivated by the depth and authenticity of her performance. Even the competitors, who had once seemed indifferent, watched intently, some with quiet awe and respect. As the piece progressed, the music grew more complex, the passages requiring both technical skill and emotional expression. She allowed herself to respond instinctively to the demands of the music, letting each note guide her to the next. There were moments of quiet reflection, delicate touches that seemed to suspend time, and moments of intensity where her fingers danced across the keys with controlled passion. The contrast between soft and loud passages, the subtle shifts in tempo and rhythm, created a dynamic journey that carried the audience along effortlessly. Halfway through the performance, she reached a particularly challenging sequence. Her fingers moved rapidly yet gracefully, each note landing with clarity and precision. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, a collective anticipation building as the audience sensed the climax approaching. The judges scribbled notes quickly, some nodding subtly, others exchanging glances of recognition. The competitors leaned forward, unable to hide their fascination. In that moment, she felt a sense of unity, an invisible connection between everyone in the hall, all drawn together by the music she created. As the piece moved toward its final passages, the melody became more expressive, carrying with it a story of personal triumph. She thought about the journey that had led her here, the long hours of practice, the challenges overcome, the moments of doubt, and the unwavering love for the piano that had guided her every step. She poured all of this into the music, letting the performance be an extension of herself. Each note, each chord, was infused with her emotion, and she could feel the audience responding in kind. There was a moment of stillness, a pause in the music that seemed to stretch time itself. She allowed it to linger, letting the audience absorb the silence and anticipate what was to come. Then, with a gentle but deliberate touch, she resumed, guiding the piece to its final resolution. The notes cascaded with a sense of inevitability, a natural conclusion to the journey she had shared. Her fingers moved effortlessly, yet with precision, each sound contributing to the story, each pause creating space for emotion to resonate. The final chords rang out, sustained and full, filling the hall with a sense of completion and satisfaction. She allowed them to resonate fully before lifting her hands, letting the sound fade naturally into silence. For a brief moment, There was nothing but the echo of the music and the collective stillness of the audience. Then, slowly, the applause began, growing in intensity, filling the room with a wave of appreciation and awe. Some people rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, their faces radiant with admiration. The judges exchanged smiles and nodded in acknowledgement, clearly impressed by the artistry and emotional depth of her performance. She stood and bowed gracefully, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment and connection. The applause washed over her, not as a reward, but as a recognition of the journey she had shared, the story she had told, and the emotions she had conveyed. Competitors approached her quietly, offering congratulations and words of respect. She accepted them with humility, feeling grateful not only for the recognition but for the shared experience of being part of a community that valued music and expression. Backstage, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The journey of the competition had been challenging, yet it had also been immensely rewarding. Each performance had been an opportunity to express herself, to connect with others, and to grow as a musician and as a person. She felt a quiet pride, not in the accolades or the applause, but in the realization that she had given her best and had shared something meaningful with those who listened out. As she prepared to leave the competition hall, she thought about the lessons she had learned. Music was not just about technical skill or perfection. It was about authenticity, connection, and the courage to express oneself fully. She understood now that the true impact of a performance lay not in the awards won, but in the hearts touched and the emotions evoked. Each note she had played was a reflection of her journey, a story told without words, yet understood by all who had listened. Walking out into the cool evening air, she felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The competition had ended, but the experiences, the emotions, and the connections would remain with her. She knew that this was just one step in a lifelong journey of music and expression, one that would continue to unfold in new and unexpected ways. She carried with her a deep gratitude for the opportunity to perform, to share, and to connect, knowing that the power of music could reach far beyond any stage, touching lives and leaving an enduring mark. With each step, she felt lighter, as if the music she had played had not only filled the hall but also filled her, leaving a sense of completeness and joy. The journey through the competition had tested her, challenged her, and inspired her, but above all, it had reminded her of why she played: to communicate, to share, and to bring beauty into the world. And with that understanding, she walked forward into the future, ready for whatever new melodies awaited, carrying with her the knowledge that music had the power to change lives, including her own.